So, hello again. Today we are going to complete chapter 7. We talked last time about costs and we talked about the total cost, which is the summation of total fixed costs plus total variable costs. We also talked about average cost, which is average variable cost plus average fixed cost. We drew the cost curves. We saw that the average fixed cost is always decreasing. We show that the average variable cost and average costs are U-shaped. We also studied the relationship between marginal cost and average costs. Today we are going to complete the analysis of costs. To start with, we need to understand that the two main factors that determine the cost curves are the factor prices, the prices of the factors of production or of the inputs used in the production process, like the prices of land, labor, capital, and so on. Higher, for example, higher rents and higher wages means higher costs of production. We also have the production function. It determines the cost curves. Why? Because technological improvements. Do you remember in chapter 6, we said that technological improvements allow the firm to produce the same output with fewer inputs, which implies that in this case the costs will be falling. So the main factors that govern the cost curves are the factor prices, the production function, and technological improvements. Okay, so let's assume that a certain production process involves two inputs of production as shown in the table in the slide. It involves land and labor. If you know the units of land and the units of labor utilized, the price of land and the price of labor or the wage of labor per worker, you can easily calculate total cost. What will total cost be? It will be the price of land multiplied by the quantity of land utilized plus the wage of the worker multiplied by the units of the workers or labor utilized. So for example, if we take producing 0 units of output, the only cost in this case will be the fixed cost, which is the cost of land. How do I calculate it? 10 units of land multiplied by the rent per acre, which is 5.5. 5.5 times 10 will give you the 55. Taking another example, when I'm producing 1 unit of output, what will happen? The fixed cost is equal to, again, 10, which is the land, multiplied by 5.5, which is 55. Plus what? Plus the labor times the wage of labor. How many units of labor do I need? 6 multiplied by the wage that each worker takes, 5. 6 times 5 is 30. 30 plus the 55, the fixed cost, will give you 85, and so on. So in the previous example, you need to know that land represents the fixed cost because you need to pay the rent of the land, whether you are producing or you're not producing anything. Labor is the variable factor. It represents the variable cost. Okay. Why do we have U-shaped cost curve? If you remember in the last lecture, we said that we have U-shaped cost curves. The average cost and the marginal cost and the average variable cost, they tend to decrease at the beginning, reach a minimum point, and then begin to increase once again. Why is this the case? What's the reason behind it? The reason behind it lies in the law of diminishing returns. What is the law of diminishing returns? Do you remember the distinction between the short run and the long run? In the short run, we said there are some fixed factors of production and some variable factors of production, while in the long run you can vary or you can change all factors of production. Let's assume we are in the short run and I'm only increasing labor while holding capital and other inputs as constant. So we know that the law of diminishing returns will start to operate and the marginal product of each additional unit of labor will tend to decrease. When the marginal product tends to fall, this is translated in the fact that the marginal cost tends to increase. In other words, the marginal cost is the mirror image of the marginal product curve. What does this mean? It means that the law of diminishing returns helps us to explain why the cost curves are U-shaped. Let's read this line. In the short run, when factors such as capital and land are fixed, variable factors tend to show an initial phase of increasing marginal product followed by diminishing marginal product when the law of diminishing returns starts to operate. The corresponding cost curves show what? Show an initial phase of declining marginal costs followed by increasing marginal cost when diminishing returns start to operate. That's why I'm saying there are mirror images. Let's look at this graph. I hope it is clear for you. It is also in the slide. The marginal product starts to increase first before the law of diminishing returns set in, and then it starts to decrease when the law of diminishing returns starts to operate. This is an initial phase of increase in the marginal product. The marginal product eventually must decrease because the marginal product is the slope of the total product curve. And as you continue to increase labor while holding other factors of production constant, the contribution or the marginal product of each additional worker must decrease. This is translated into, they are mirror images. In the region when the marginal product is increasing, the marginal cost is decreasing, okay? In the region when the marginal product is falling, the marginal cost is increasing. This implies that they are both mirror images together. Why? When the marginal product starts to fall, okay, it means the contribution of each additional worker to output is decreasing. And I'm paying the worker the same wage, right? Each one of those workers takes the same wage. When they take the same wage and they are starting to contribute less to production, this implies that the additional cost that I am incurring as a firm tends to increase. That's why when marginal product is falling, the marginal cost must be increasing. Again, why? Because when the contribution of each worker to the production process is less, it means he is producing less and less output to me. And he is paid the same wage rate like all other workers. So this implies that I, as a firm, I'm incurring additional cost. The cost of each extra unit is increasing because the workers are not working efficiently, because they are starting to talk together, they're starting to do anything else other than the production. So my costs are increasing when the law of diminishing returns starts to operate. Remember again the relationship between marginal and average. Whenever the marginal cost curve is below the average cost curve, the average cost curve is decreasing. Whenever the marginal, which is this region, marginal is above the average cost curve, the average cost curve is increasing. Marginal below average, average is falling. Marginal above average, average is rising or increasing. This is exactly the explanation that we were just saying now. You can read it from the slide. As we said, the law of diminishing marginal returns implies that the marginal cost is increasing. How does the firm choose its inputs? This is a very important decision. There are different production techniques to produce any given amount of output. For example, some firms can rely on labor-intensive techniques. Some firms can rely on capital-intensive techniques and utilize more capital in the production process, okay? You will find that even the same plant in different countries can use different amounts of inputs, different combination of inputs. Why? Always remember the firm is interested in minimizing the cost of production, okay? So it will choose the input combination that will lead to the minimum cost of production. For example, LG plant in Egypt will tend to produce leads usually using more labor because the price of labor in Egypt is relatively less expensive than other countries like Germany, while in Germany they will tend to produce the leads using capital intensive techniques because the capital there is abundant. They have higher level of technology while the cost of labor is very high there. So we always assume that firms minimize the costs of production. The cost minimization makes sense not only for perfectly competitive firms, but even for monopolies, for oligopolistic firms, for non-profit organizations like colleges and hospitals. Every firm, every entity seeks to minimize the costs of production. So how will the firm minimize the cost of production? How will it decide between different input combinations? Suppose, for example, that the firm's engineers have calculated the desired output level of 9 units to be produced with two possible options, okay? It is a function of energy and labor. So the energy and labor are the two inputs used in the production process, okay? The price of energy is $2 per unit. The price of labor or the cost of labor is $5 per unit. You have option A and option B. This is given in the problem. You either use input combination of 10 units of energy and 2 units of labor, or option B, 4 units of energy and 5 units of labor. Can you calculate the total cost associated with these two options? Yes, you can. All you do is you multiply the price of input times the units of input used in the two possible options or in the two scenarios. This implies that the cost for option A, as denoted in the slide, is the $2, the cost of energy times 10 units of energy used, plus the cost of labor. The price of labor is 5, the units used are 2, so 5 times 2. This gives a total cost of $30. While option B gives the total cost of, you will calculate it using the price of inputs. This implies that option A is the cheaper option. Since the firm seeks to minimize the cost of production, it will choose option A. Do we have to calculate every time? Do we have to calculate the costs of production of all production options or all production techniques to choose? This will be a very tedious and time-consuming task. Luckily, there is a rule that we utilize in economics to reach the minimum cost combination of inputs, to reach the most efficient combination of inputs that automatically yields the minimum possible cost. How can we do this? How can we find the least cost combination? There is a rule. Do you remember in the consumer theory when we talked about the equi-marginal principle used to maximize the utility of the consumer? And we said any rational consumer, to maximize his utility, he should equate the marginal utility per dollar spent on all the goods and services he is consuming when we divided marginal utility divided by the price to be set equal for all goods. The same logic applies to the production theory, but using the production concepts. In order to reach the minimum cost combination of inputs, you need to equate the marginal product per dollar spent on each input equal for all inputs you are using. What does this mean? It means that you divide the marginal product of each input by its price. Okay, this will give you the marginal product per dollar of input, the marginal product of each dollar that the firm spends on that input. The cost minimizing combination comes when the marginal product per dollar of input is equal for all inputs that the firm is using. Okay, so the rule would be, the least cost rule would be to produce a given level of output while minimizing costs, a firm should employ inputs until it has equalized the marginal product per dollar for each input. Assume that there are only two inputs utilized, labor and capital. To reach the minimum cost combination of these two inputs, you should set the marginal product of labor divided by the price of labor equal to the marginal product of capital divided by the price of capital. Again, this rule is exactly the same as what we utilized in the consumer theory, where we equated the marginal utility per dollar spent per good. What does this imply? It implies that whenever the price of one factor falls while the other factor prices remain the same, what can you expect? What can you expect? For example, if the margin, let's say, marginal product of labor divided by the price of labor should be equal to the marginal product of capital divided by the price of capital. What will happen if the price of labor in the denominator fell? What will happen to this entire ratio, which is MPL over PL? When the denominator decreases, this ratio will tend to increase. So this means that it will be greater than MPK over PK. As a rational firm that seeks to minimize its costs of production, it will do what? Since the price of labor decreased, it will utilize more labor. So the quantity of labor used will tend to increase. When the quantity of labor tend to increase while other inputs are held as constant, what will happen to marginal product of labor by the law of diminishing returns? It will fall. It will fall until what? Until you reach this equality once again, which is the same explanation that we did in the consumer theory. Again, when the price of one of the inputs like labor decreases, as a rational firm that wants to minimize the cost of production, it will tend to use more of the cheaper inputs. So it will increase the quantity of labor utilized. When it does that, what will happen to the marginal product of labor? It will tend to fall. It will fall until you reach the equality where MPL over PL is equal to MPK over PK. And this is what's explained in the slide. One remaining concept to talk about, which is very important in economics, the opportunity costs. What do we mean by opportunity costs? It is defined as the cost of the best foregone alternative. يعني ايه the cost of the best foregone alternative? Assume you have a quiz next week, okay, which is not the case at all, of course. Assume you have a quiz and you decided that you would like to go to the movies, okay? What is the cost of the movies? Is it just the price of the ticket that you will pay? If you are talking only about the explicit cost, yes, it is the cost of the price of the ticket that you are paying. But there is another cost, which is the opportunity cost of your time. The time that you spent in the movies could have been allocated to studying for your quiz. So this means there is a cost of a foregone alternative. As economists, when we calculate the cost of any option, we take into account the opportunity cost of our decision. We take into account the cost of the best foregone alternative. So if you want to calculate the cost of going to the movies, it will not only be the price of the ticket that you pay, it will also be the opportunity of the time that you could have spent studying instead of going to the movies. This means that the opportunity cost will take into account the possibility of getting a higher grade if you did not go to the movies and decided to study for your quiz. Why is this important? Because we need to differentiate between costs from an accountant point of view and costs from an economic point of view. What does this mean? Accountants tend to calculate only explicit costs, costs that are paid out of the money of the firm, out of the pockets of the firm, while economists calculate explicit costs and implicit costs, which are opportunity costs of decision. Again, what does this mean? How do we use it? We use it, for example, if I am running a small business, a family business, okay, and I am running this business, okay, this means there are unpaid hours of my work, okay, I'm not taking financial return because this is my own business. If I'm calculating the opportunity cost, I should calculate the cost of the best foregone alternative for me. For example, what is the salary that I would have got if I'm not the manager of this family business and I worked in any other firm? For example, if I would take in any other firm 10,000 LE, this 10,000 LE should be calculated as a cost, as an implicit cost, as an opportunity cost. So calculating costs from an economic point of view includes inside it the opportunity costs, which are costs that are not revealed in money terms. Again, what is another example? If I'm, for example, running my business and I'm using my own flat to run this business, I should calculate the opportunity cost of this flat. If I would have rented this flat to another firm, how much of this rent, for example, if the rent is 5,000 LE, I should include this 5,000 LE as part of my economic costs. This is the cost of the best foregone alternative. So, from an economic point of view, there is the costs that are not only explicit, there are the costs that are implicit and not paid